The acrid smell of burning rubber and melting metal hung in the air like a toxic memory. Jake Martinez stood motionless, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, watching the smoldering remains of his prized 2019 Harley-Davidson Street Glide Special. 15 years of hard work, countless overtime shifts as a paramedic, and every spare penny he'd saved had gone into that motorcycle. And now it was nothing more than a charred skeleton of twisted metal and scorched chrome. Maple Grove Estates had always been a neighborhood with rules, endless, suffocating rules. But Jake had never imagined those rules would escalate to outright destruction of personal property. His eyes narrowed, fixing on the silhouette of Margaret Blackwood, the HOA president, who stood just beyond the yellow crime scene tape, her posture rigid and unapologetic. It had started 3 months ago when Jake first moved into the pristine suburban development. A single father raising his 14-year-old daughter, Lily, he was looking for a fresh start after his divorce. The house was perfect, modern, spacious, with a well-maintained yard that met every ridiculous HOA specification. But perfection, Jake was about to learn, came with a price. Margaret Blackwood had approached him during his first community barbecue, her perfectly pressed khaki shorts and matching polo shirt a stark contrast to Jake's more casual firefighter-turned-paramedic attire. "We expect all homeowners to be active participants in our community," she'd said, her tone more command than suggestion. "Committee meetings are mandatory, and we have a strict rotation for neighborhood watch, landscaping coordination, and community events." Jake had politely declined. As a first responder working 24-hour shifts and raising a teenage daughter, his time was precious. He maintained his property immaculately, paid his dues on time, and saw no reason to sacrifice his limited free time to endless meetings about lawn heights and mailbox colors. That's when the passive-aggressive notices began. First, a warning about the shade of blue on his mailbox. Apparently, deviated 0.5 shades from the approved Coastal Breeze palette. Then came citations about the precise angle of his garbage cans and the excessive number of Amazon packages delivered weekly. But this, burning his motorcycle, this was something else entirely. The police detective approached, notepad in hand. "Mr. Martinez, we gathered significant evidence. Surveillance footage caught Margaret Blackwood pouring accelerant on your motorcycle at 2:37 a.m. last night. Forensics has confirmed her fingerprints on the gas can." Jake's mind reeled. What kind of person would go to such extreme lengths over a neighborhood committee membership? The motorcycle wasn't just transportation, it was his escape, his one luxury after years of grueling emergency medical work. Every scratch and custom detail told a story of hard-earned freedom. As the detective continued explaining the preliminary findings, Jake caught Margaret's gaze. There was something in her eyes, not just anger, but chilling, calculated intensity that suggested this was about far more than a simple HOA dispute. Little did Jake know, this was just the beginning of a conflict that would unravel secrets far deeper than any neighborhood could imagine. The interrogation room felt cold and sterile, a sharp contrast to the burning rage Margaret Blackwood was trying desperately to contain. Detective Sarah Reyes watched carefully as the once pristine HOA president sat across the metal table, her perfectly coiffed hair now disheveled, her immaculate makeup smudged. "I want my lawyer," Margaret repeated for the third time, her voice losing the authoritative edge that had terrorized Maple Grove Estates for years. But the evidence was overwhelming. Security camera footage, forensic evidence, and a trail of documented harassment painted a damning picture. Jake Martinez had been more than just an uncooperative homeowner. He was a threat to everything Margaret had meticulously built over the past decade. Back at the Martinez home, Lily sat with her father in their living room, surrounded by insurance adjusters and police documentation. "Dad," she said softly, "there's something weird about this." Mrs. Blackwood always seemed different. Jake knew exactly what she meant. During the initial police investigation, he learned more about Margaret Blackwood than he ever wanted to know. She wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. She was a former real estate developer with a history of aggressive tactics and mysterious property dealings. Detective Reeves had pulled Jake aside earlier that day, revealing fragments of a much larger story. "Mr. Martinez, Margaret Blackwood isn't just facing charges for destroying your motorcycle. We've uncovered evidence of multiple fraudulent property transactions and a pattern of intimidation that goes back years." The motorcycle burning was just the tip of the iceberg. Lily, sharp and observant like her father, had been digging through old community records she found in the home office. "Dad, look at this," she said, spreading out a series of property documents. "These HOA bylaws, they're not normal. It's like they're designed to force homeowners to sell their properties." Jake studied the documents. Hidden within the dense legal language were clauses that seemed almost impossible, provisions that could technically allow the HOA to seize property under certain manufactured circumstances. Margaret Blackwood had been playing a long game, and burning his motorcycle was just one move in a much larger strategy. As night fell, Jake realized this was no longer just about a destroyed motorcycle. This was about protecting his home and his daughter and exposing a system of corruption that had been quietly operating in the shadows of suburban perfection. The next morning, Margaret Blackwood would be arraigned. But Jake knew the real battle was just beginning. Someone had to stand up to the systemic bullying, and he was determined to be that person, not just for himself, but for every homeowner who had ever felt powerless against a system designed to exploit them. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as Margaret Blackwood's arraignment transformed into something far more significant. What had started as a simple criminal case was rapidly unraveling into a complex investigation of widespread community fraud. Attorney Rebecca Chen, who had been brought in by Jake to represent the collective interests of Maple Grove Estate's homeowners, presented a compelling case. Her evidence revealed a shocking pattern. Margaret had been systematically targeting homeowners using HOA regulations as a weapon to force property sales at below-market values. My client discovered a network of shell companies, Chen explained to the packed courtroom, her voice cutting through the murmur of spectators. These companies, all linked to Margaret Blackwood, would purchase properties and dramatically reduce prices after creating unbearable living conditions for homeowners. Jake sat beside Lily, watching the proceedings with a mix of determination and disbelief. The motorcycle burning was no longer just a personal vendetta, it was part of a calculated strategy of intimidation and economic manipulation. Detective Sarah Reyes took the stand, detailing the extensive digital trail that tracked Margaret's illegal activities. Bank records showed mysterious transfers, property records revealed suspicious rapid turnover, and email chains exposed a network of corrupt real estate agents and local officials who had been complicit in the scheme. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Lily Martinez. The 14-year-old had spent weeks combing through digital archives and community records, uncovering a trail of documentation that even seasoned investigators had missed. Her computer skills, honed through countless hours of research and a natural investigative instinct, had become a crucial weapon in exposing the truth. Margaret Blackwood sat motionless, her once imposing demeanor crumbling under the weight of evidence. The pristine HOA president, who had terrorized the neighborhood for years, now looked small and defeated, her carefully constructed facade of community leadership exposed as an elaborate front for criminal enterprise. But Jake knew this was far from over. The motorcycle burning was just the most visible symptom of a deeper corruption that had been festering in Maple Grove Estates for years. Each revelation brought more questions. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many other communities might be experiencing similar systematic exploitation? As the first day of hearings concluded, Jake received an encrypted message on his phone. An anonymous source, someone from within the real estate network, wanted to meet. The message was clear. There were more secrets to uncover, and the story of Margaret Blackwood was far from finished. Lily squeezed her father's hand. "We're not done yet, are we?" she asked. Jake looked down at his daughter, a proud smile crossing his face. "Not even close," he responded, knowing that their fight for justice was just beginning. The anonymous meeting place was a small, nondescript coffee shop on the outskirts of town. Jake arrived early, scanning the room with the hypervigilance he developed during years of emergency medical response. Lily had insisted on accompanying him, her tech-savvy skills providing an unexpected layer of protection. The middle-aged man in a rumpled suit slid into the booth, his hands trembling slightly as he placed a thick manila envelope on the table. "My name is Eric Donovan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was Margaret Blackwood's primary real estate agent. I can't live with the guilt anymore." The documents Eric shared were explosive. They detailed a sophisticated scheme that stretched back nearly a decade, involving multiple HOA communities, corrupt local officials, and a network of shell companies designed to manipulate property values. Margaret Blackwood wasn't just a local HOA president. She was the mastermind of a multi-million-dollar fraud operation. Detective Sarah Reyes had been tracking the case quietly, and Jake's discoveries were providing the missing pieces of a complex puzzle. The motorcycle burning was now revealed as a calculated move. Jake had been targeted specifically because he was an outsider who couldn't be easily intimidated. "She was running out of time," Eric explained, his hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. A state-level investigation was getting closer. The motorcycle incident was desperate, a last-ditch effort to maintain control. Lily, quiet but observant, had been scanning the documents on the secured tablet. "Dad," she whispered, "look at this property record. There's a connection to the mayor's office." The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had initially suspected. Margaret Blackwood's network extended into local government, real estate, and banking, a web of corruption that had been systematically exploiting homeowners for years. As they left the coffee shop, Jake received a call from attorney Rebecca Chen. "The prosecutor's office wants to make a deal," she said. "Margaret's willing to provide full testimony about the entire operation in exchange for a reduced sentence." But Jake knew Margaret Blackwood. This was just another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative. That evening, as they reviewed the evidence in their home office, a breaking news alert flashed across the television. A major real estate fraud investigation was expanding with connections to multiple city officials. The story was beginning to break wide open. Lily looked up at her father, a mix of excitement and concern in her eyes. "We've started something big, haven't we?" Jake nodded, understanding that their fight was about more than a burned motorcycle. It was about exposing a system that had preyed on unsuspecting homeowners for far too long. The final act was yet to come, and Margaret Blackwood's fate hung in the balance. The courtroom was packed on the final day of the trial. Margaret Blackwood sat pale and diminished, her once immaculate appearance now a shadow of its former self. Years of manipulation and fraud were about to be laid bare before the entire community. Jake Martinez sat in the front row, Lily beside him, watching as years of systemic corruption unraveled. The state's key witness, Eric Donovan, had spent weeks providing detailed testimony, exposing a network of fraud that extended far beyond Maple Grove Estates. The defendant systematically targeted vulnerable homeowners, the prosecutor declared, presenting evidence of how Margaret had used HOA regulations as a weapon. Through a complex series of shell companies and strategic harassment, she manipulated property values, forcing homeowners to sell at dramatically reduced prices. Lily's investigative work had been crucial. The teenager's digital forensics had uncovered encrypted communications, financial transfers, and a paper trail that connected Margaret to multiple corrupt officials. Her testimony had been a turning point in the investigation, proving that sometimes the most unexpected heroes emerge from the most unlikely places. Detective Sarah Reyes took the stand, detailing the extensive investigation. The motorcycle burning, Jake's motorcycle, was now revealed as a pivotal moment. It had been the action that ultimately brought down Margaret's entire operation, the moment when her carefully constructed facade of community leadership began to crumble. As the verdict was read, Margaret Blackwood was found guilty on multiple counts: property fraud, destruction of property, conspiracy, and racketeering. The sentence was substantial, minus 15 years in prison, with additional financial penalties that would strip her of the wealth she had accumulated through years of illegal activities. Outside the courthouse, Jake stood with Lily, watching as the last of the legal proceedings concluded. His burned motorcycle had been more than just a personal loss. It had become a symbol of resistance against systemic corruption. "We did it, Dad," Lily said, squeezing his hand. Jake smiled, knowing the journey had been about more than just personal vindication. They had exposed a network of fraud, protected other homeowners, and shown that one person, supported by truth and determination, could make a difference. The local news crews swarmed, capturing the moment of justice. But for Jake and Lily, the real victory was something more personal. They had stood up to a system designed to intimidate and exploit, and they had won. As they walked away from the courthouse, a brand new motorcycle, a gift from the community in recognition of their courage, waited for Jake. It was more than just a replacement for what was lost. It was a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of justice finally served. The Maple Grove Estates HOA would never be the same again.